So tonight we're going to talk about goat reproduction basics, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of background of me personally. I raise sheep and I've been with Extension for almost 10 years now, but I've raised sheep my entire life. But that doesn't mean that I haven't raised goats as well. So you all get to have a beautiful insight and look back into my past of goat showing. So here we are. I like to show market goats back in the day. So we have Earl and Domino and Dixie and Mr. Nibbles from back in my career as we went through. And it was so gracious that Dixie was actually a doe, and she came back to our farm where we had 3 others. And we were able to kind of use those. The plan was to kind of use those mostly for nanny goats for our sheep if we had any bottle lambs. But we were trying to get Dixie into our program just a little bit more to try and maybe create some market lambs of my own. And then Mr. Nibbles, he was a wether that my buyer decided to give back to me. So how gracious of them that I got to keep Mr. Nibbles for an additional 11 years. As we had him kind of just hang out with our teaser bucks and whatnot. So I'm also really good friends with lots of folks who raise goats, and I go out and I take pictures for them and whatnot. So I'm definitely around them quite a bit as we go forward and move through here. So forgive me if I slip up and say you instead of doe. It's just ingrained in my brain as we go through here. There's lots of similarities, but we do have some differences that I definitely want to touch base on tonight. So first I want to talk about a goat management wheel. So this is mine that I got. You can kind of see here. It has the months on the outside, and then on the inside it has specific lines for you. So it has some management practices that we all should be doing throughout the year, and we can decide which one we care about the most, set the arrow to that, and then it kind of gives us a back date for that. So there's definitely plenty of these out there that you can purchase. There's ones out there that you can print and kind of craft together like a kindergarten craft, if you will. You can kind of go through there and find those as you move forward. But it's very helpful if you have a specific goal in mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about our goals and what we should care about the most on those lines as we move through. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the estrus cycle. So in general, when we talk about estrus cycles in goats and sheep, we really want to understand that they are seasonal, right? So we really have to think about the amount of daylight that's being created outside. So which are they? Do they like to breed in the dark, or do they like to breed in the light, right? So sheep and goats like to breed in the dark. So what's the darkest time of the year? Winter solstice, right? So in December. So the shorter the day length, the more likely you are to have does that are in cycle and are able to breed. So the shorter the day length, the more darkness happens and gets to the pineal gland of the goat. That pineal gland creates melatonin. In goats, melatonin leads to a hormone called GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that gonadotropin releasing hormone starts the cascade of hormones that creates the estrus cycle. So when we talk about the cycle itself, let's say we are in darkness, we have those shorter days, we have that melatonin going there, that GnRH has started this cycle. What does the cycle look like? What does it do? Well, in goats, it's 21 days, which is a big difference when we talk about sheep and goats. This is one of the key factors that we want to talk about. So that cycle is 21 days instead of 17 in sheep. And what is happening during those 21 days? So in the ovary, there's formation of something called a follicle. So if you want to think about it, a follicle is kind of like a blister. So if you had a too tight of a shoe that rubbed on your heel, or maybe high heels, that blister forms. It's kind of this fluid-filled pocket. But the follicle inside of that, with the fluid, has an egg, right? So The cycle is we form that weird blister follicle that has the egg, then we rupture that follicle, which means ovulation, the egg is released, and then that blistery part that's still left over on the ovary forms something called a corpus lutea. So that cycle, those things happen during this cycle. And then there's another hormone that comes in and stops that corpus lutea from doing its job and starts the whole process over again. We're going to get into hormones pretty heavy as we go through here. So what is estrus itself? So estrus itself is what we would call heat, right? So when that doe is actually receptive to being bred, when she goes into heat, it lasts anywhere between 24 to 36 hours when we talk about goats and does. Ovulation is 18 hours after that heat comes through. So we want to be sure that we're thinking about this and understanding it if we ever want to try to advance any or use any advanced breeding technologies. We need to understand when ovulation is occurring, how that egg travels, and what we need to be looking for in terms of estrus. So maybe you're more of a visual person like I am. So over here on the left, we have the cycle. So I've put in a couple different specific hormones that we care about, that we're going to talk way more about as we move through. A couple different points in time where something happens. So ovulation or the corpus luteum. And then does the doe recognize if she's pregnant or not? And then what happens? So first we have a product or a hormone called FSH, which would be the follicle stimulating hormone. We also add in something called LH, which is the luteinizing hormone. After those two things kind of get together, we have this wonderful blister popping ovulation. Once that blister pops, we have a corpus luteum that forms. That leftover blister part produces a hormone called progesterone, which is also going to be really important as we move through. So now is a really critical and crucial time in the cycle. The doe has to decide, is she pregnant or not? So this is when the doe is understanding if she has conceived and has embryos and is creating a fetus, or is there just an egg been ovulated and there's no conception and we don't have any embryo developing. If there is not any embryonic development, they will move on to a hormone called prostaglandin is being produced, and that kills this corpus luteum. So it cuts it slices or lyses that corpus luteum, the leftover blister part, stops the production of progesterone and starts the cycle over again. So this is that round or circular vision that you have over here on the left. And then we also have it in graph form. So we've got the different hormones key over here. We've got FSH, progesterone, estradiol or estrogen, and then PGF2 alpha is this prostaglandin. So you can kind of see all of these different hormones are happening. Every 21 days is all of that fluctuation. Don't worry about this yet. We're going to get into it a little bit deeper once we get into some synchronization. But I just wanted to be sure that everyone understands that these does, once we get past that seasonality or anestrus, get them out of this stuck period where they're not cycling. Once we do get them cycling, it's this very round and cyclical ability of ovulation, recognizing if they're pregnant or not, and starting that cycle over. So we want to be sure that we're understanding that as we move forward. So I want to talk a little bit more about some management practices that we're going to talk about when we talk about or think about pre-breeding, post-breeding management, all those management decisions that we want to think about. So pre-breeding, we want to think about something called flushing. So this is in a nutritional term, right? So we're going to talk about flushing in a different way later on, but flushing in a nutritional term is very easily defined as increasing that animal's energy intake. So we want to do this about 2 weeks prior to breeding. So this is going to help us understand or help us get those does to kind of fake them out, right? We want to trick their brain to thinking, oh, wow, I have a lot more energy. I have a lot more ability to care for offspring. I should ovulate more eggs. So we trick them to ovulate more eggs, hence increasing our multiple births. So in my sheep world, it would be fantastic if ever you laid down and had twins and then she was able to raise them both on her own. Right. So we want to be sure that we are kind of decreasing those amount of singles, and we can do that by fleshing nutritionally. So how do you increase that animal's energy intake? Well, if you're in like a grain situation, you can just add a half a pound of like cracked corn. That's going to increase your energy intake. Or if we're more on a grass-fed or a pasture situation, we should increase that forage quality. So just bump up those energy intake that they're getting so that we can trick them enough to understand that they might be able to carry and might be able to survive a pregnancy of multiple births. So when to breed? This is another one that we kind of got to think about pre-breeding, obviously, because we're not sure exactly what the best time of year to do that is. Well, especially when we have our little management wheel here. A better question that I have for you is, when do you want a kid, right? So kidding is a very, very high labor time. So we want to be sure that it's a point in time where you have extra help on the farm on the farm. So my life, we also raise crops, and right now would be a horrific time to be lambing. So we're very, very busy. A lot of our labor force, a lot of our ability to my husband, his family, my father, all these people are not focused on lambing. So we want to be sure that we have a time frame that we're going to get offspring when we have a good amount of labor around. So it's really important that we think about, and I believe that we're probably going to have another webinar on kidding and kid care and whatnot, and getting all of that preparation done as you need it. So we want to be sure that we're getting all of that completed before we lamb, excuse me, before we kid. I knew I was going to mess up. I knew I was going to do it. So we want to be sure that we think about that and get all of those supplies organized ahead of time, get anything ordered that we need to, be sure that we have the proper facilities, be sure it's clean and a great place for that baby animal to come into. So if we think we've got, okay, I kind of know when I'm going to have some extra time, I'm going to have some extra people around. So then backtrack that by 150 days, and that's when we should be breeding. So the average gestation for a goat is 150 days. So some rough math. I did it on my little goat management wheel. I set my kidding date to be March 1. That's when I know I'm going to have people around. So then I backtracked that, and a doe that's bred on October 1 is due to kid on March 1. So that's kind of a general, simple tool that we can use, especially if you have that management wheel. There's plenty of gestation calendars online that you can go to and kind of backtrack and figure out what your breed date should be as we understand that. So when we talk about when to breed, it's also a good a good idea to talk about how old should your does be when you breed them for the first time. So we want to be sure that we're not breeding them anywhere before 7 to 10 months of that first mating. We just want to be sure that we're getting those animals to 60% of their expected mature weight before we start breeding them. We're going to learn here a little bit later on that our nutrient requirements, or our nutrient hierarchy, where our energy goes to in that animal, is really dependent on where they are in that growth stage. So we want to be sure that we kind of wait a little bit longer and get those animals growth and get them a little bit growing on their own before they have to protect and keep a fetus alive as well. So moral management, as we talk a little bit more, weaning is a topic that we would kind of think about when we talk about reproduction. So weaning can happen when the kid is 2.5 times its birth weight and is about 6 to 8 weeks old. So kids that are nursing, we can keep on. We recommend that we keep on for 12 weeks. And this is really great information that I pulled out of the 4-H goat resource book. So the goat resource book for 4-H has plenty of information. You can go to your extension office and purchase one. We want to be sure that no matter what kind of goats we have, if they're bottle fed or if they're nursing, that we keep that creep feed available to them to stimulate all of that eating and understand. We want to be sure that they have that ability to also get that creep feed to them to eat. If we are bottle feeding, we want to be sure that we are doing it in a most economical way for the success of our business would be to wean early. Milk replacer is quite expensive, and we want to be sure that we're understanding that we can get them switched over to a solid feed. It's going to be helpful down the road on our pocketbooks. Brady, did I see something pop up?
Yeah, there's just a couple questions here in the Q&A, Jackie. So I think just for the purpose of keeping it smooth, we'll address those at the end, and I'll kind of monitor them as they come in.
Awesome. Thanks, Brady. So regardless of what we're doing and what method we're using for the weaning, we want to be sure that we're doing it slow, right? Any change is hard, especially on a very, very small baby goat, baby lamb, baby calf, anything. We want to be sure that we are transitioning any type of feed slowly, especially when we're talking about some of those bottle fed goats. Be sure we keep them, if we are weaning them, that we kind of do it very slowly, decreasing their milk, and be sure that they have access to that creep feed so they can pick up that energy requirement through that solid feed. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit of different types of reproduction. So we're going to talk a little bit about different ways or different methods that we can get these does pregnant. So the first up is the natural breeding, right? So this should be the most common method that we have out there, the most thought through and understood availability to us. So it's really placing a buck out with those, right? So this is pretty standard across the way. It would be a great idea, talking about management, if we had a breeding soundness exam on our males beforehand. So what all entails of a breeding soundness exam, they will do a scrotal circumference. So they'll be able to palpate his scrotum and see if it is the right tone, texture, all of those things, and be sure that it is acceptable girth as well. They will also collect sperm, and they will do a morphology test. So they'll see how many are normal, how many are abnormal in any way versus, tails are not moving or double-headed or any of those other things. So they can take a look and see how many are normal versus abnormal for that sperm morphology. So this test is, you call up your veterinarian, be sure you have a relationship with them and understand that it's probably could potentially save you a lot of money. So I told you guys that I raise sheep. We have several friends that have made it all the way to the last week of November when we ultrasound our sheep to see if they're bred or not, and they have all their sheep are open. They don't have any of them that have caught to their natural buck. If they would have just paid their money and went ahead and did this breeding soundness exam ahead of time, they wouldn't be out all of these pregnancies that they could have had lambs for. So it's really interesting when we think about this is that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of gain. So we got to kind of think that in the back of our mind that we're managing these does very heavily, and we have mostly does, but these bucks need to be managed as well. So when we're talking about managing these bucks, it's also really important that we think about hoof care, right? So he's going to be walking around quite a bit, and we need to understand that trimming these hooves, we should do it at least 3 weeks before breeding, right? More is better. 6 weeks is fine as well. I am quite well versed in trimming hooves of sheep, maybe too well versed in the fact that I like to get them down pretty tight, right? Which normally means there's blood involved, right? There's somebody limping at the end of the day because I've trimmed them just a little bit too short. Well, how frequently do you think that buck is going to be breeding does if he's got a sore foot? So we want to be sure, especially on a back foot, we want to be sure that we have trimmed those hooves at least 3 weeks prior to breeding so that they have that ability to be sure that we've gotten these does bred. So the other thing when I talk about natural breeding is that, well, yeah, we put the buck out there with the does, but how do we know when she was actually bred? Right, so you can use a marking harness or some paint, so you can paint their chest with the special marking paint, or use a marking harness that has a crayon on it. And as these, every 21 days, you can replace that crayon with a different color or replace that paint color so that you know when he marks these does, and you know if you've marked a doe multiple times. So you're able to see if she is indeed cycling or if she's maybe has caught and had start that maternal recognition of pregnancy. So that's an every 21 day cycle. So every 21 days, you'll be changing that color on that as you go through. Record management is really important. So like I said, you're going to go out there and record once, you know, doe number 1325 is orange on May the 6th, right? It only works if we actually write that down and remember that when it comes time to figure out all of our breeding records as we go through and figuring out our kidding dates as well. So natural breeding is kind of the standard of what all of our understanding of reproduction is. So everything, that estrus cycle that we talked about, that understanding birth and parturition and all of that, we've got all of this is set on this natural breeding schedule. But what if we want to kind of alter that? So maybe you only have several days off from work, you are limited on your labor, but if you could get all of your does to lamb in the 7-day period, you could take 7 days off work, you could get them all to kid in this 7-day period, then you could take vacation and understand that you're gonna be busy, but they're all gonna be there. Wouldn't that be great if we could synchronize them so that they would all be on the same cycle? They would all be at the same point in the cycle for us to get them all bred and to get them all done. Well, to do that, we have to mess with their hormones. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these hormones that we introduced early on. And we're going to talk about how we can synchronize these animals to get them together. So the first hormone that we're going to talk about is FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, right? So it stimulates the ovaries to produce the egg and the follicle, right? So it produces that blister, that fluid-like substance, stimulates the ovaries to produce that, and be sure that the egg gets in there. LH, which is luteinizing hormone. It causes that blister to pop. It causes the ovulation, and it causes that development of the CL, which is the scar that's happened after that blister has popped. Progesterone is what it does is it holds a pregnancy. It stops the cycle from continuing, and it is produced by that CL. Prostaglandin, which is often referred to as PGF2 alpha, what it does is it kills that corpus luteum, that CL, stopping progesterone production, and restarts the cycle. So these are the 4 that we're going to really hone in on and really understand as we move forward, and to kind of be sure we can tweak them to the right point where we can synchronize our group of females. So back to our little circle that we have. Estrus synchronization is concentrating your herd's estrus to a certain time. So there is a natural way to do this. There is something called the buck effect or the ram effect. in sheep as well. So it's just plain old exposure to a buck after a period of isolation. So after those does haven't seen a buck or smelled a buck for a while, you can introduce a buck into that group, and that tends to resync all of their cycles. It does a fairly decent job, but is not perfect, right? So we want to be, if you want them in a really tight, concentrated group of all of yours together, then we need to be thinking about using exogenous hormones. So the use of exogenous hormones would be to alter these chain of events. So this chain of events that we have over here in the circle, we want to be sure that we're understanding that somehow, some way, if we want to synchronize them, we've got to pause some of them so that they can catch up, or we've got to stop all of them and restart all of them. So there's different ways that we can kind of think about estrus synchronization and how to do that. So the first place that we could do that is at progesterone. So the first place we could do that is here at this corpus luteum. So if we can fake out, if we can put something into the doe to make her think that she is indeed producing progesterone, that she has not had maternal recognition of pregnancy, that would stop this from happening. It's going to slow everything up right here in this 4, 5, 6 region. So that's going to help us get the rest of those does to that area. So there are products on the market that are called CEDARs, controlled device releasing hormones right here. So they have progesterone implanted in them. You insert them vaginally into a doe or a ewe, and they release progesterone in there. So you would read the label and understand how long you would want those in there. And then you could, when you pull them out, it does tend to start this understanding of, oh, I'm not pregnant anymore. The progesterone has stopped. I need to restart and go up here to my FSH and go through there. There's also products out there that are GnRH. So I said GnRH are the precursors to FSH and LH. So they kind of create, they once GnRH is produced, they create a product, FSH and LH. There's a product on the market called PG600, and it does, it is not FSH and LH itself, but it mimics those effects in the doe and the sheep. So as we go through there, you could exogenally use these hormones to kind of work with and understand that. Then this one right here, the prostaglandin, right? So we could stop the progesterone. We could cut off all of those progesterones and start them all over right here at number 6, going from 6 to 1, using a product called Lutalice. So there's other ones out there as well that you could use and you can find prostaglandins with. So as you kind of think and understand this chart and these waves, there's different points in time through the estrus cycle that we could sync their estrogen, right? So there's places where we could slow ones down or speed ones up as we go through there. So another method of, so I guess I'm going to go back real quick. So estrus synchronization. So if you wanted to, you could, if you plan to do a natural mating and you wanted all your does to do at the same time, you could use these hormones, you could use the buck effect, you could do some of these things, and it's going to concentrate your window. So you could do the exogenous hormones and then turn your natural buck in, and you could still have that estrus synchronization. We're going to talk a little bit more about advanced breeding technologies that require this estrus synchronization, because we need to know where we are in this cycle before we move forward with other processes. So artificial insemination is one of these advanced technologies that is out there and is available to us as we move forward. So it does take intense doe management, right? So we need to know exactly where we are, where that doe is in that management and that estrus cycle, so that we get the semen to the right spot at the right time. Timing is very critical when we think about this. So we want to be sure that we are understanding that we said estrus itself was 24 to 36 hours, and then ovulation was 18 hours after that. So it's really important that we are thinking and understanding where that egg is and where the semen is, because we want to be sure that they meet up if we're going to have a successful pregnancy, a successful fertilization. So some positives of artificial insemination is that you have a much greater genetic selection. So you could have definitely different sires. You could have the ability for other genetic potential that is out there. You could use fresh semen. So maybe you have access to a buck for one day. You could get a collection of him. You could implant all of your does, and you could move forward. Or it could be frozen. So it could be from across the country and they've shipped it to you. Or in my case, we've got multiple bucks that are in our semen tank that have, are 10 years old. So if we ever need to go back and pull out some of those genetics again, we can. There's different methods of artificial insemination. So you can see here on the screen, this one is called laparoscopy. So it is actually indeed a surgery, if you will, a laparoscopy surgery, where they look in one and they are able to implant semen with the other hand. They implant it directly into those uterine horns where the semen and the egg can meet up and have a great time together. Goats are interesting that they do have a transcervical option. So if you've ever seen or heard or thought of any cows, dairy cows or beef cows being AI'd, that would be transcervical. So we're actually getting the semen through the vagina, through the cervix, and getting it into that uterine body. So goats have a cervix that is passable. It's not great. It's not like a cow where you have available folds that you can actually maneuver and get through, but they do have a little bit better and much higher success rate than sheep versus transcervical. So it's really interesting when we think about that as we move forward. Another method of advanced breeding technologies that I wanted to talk about was embryo transfer. So this is a method that we can create a higher than normal number of fertilized eggs, embryos, and move them to surrogates for gestation, right? So when we move them, we're actually flushing them out of the donor's uterus, hence a second meaning of the word flush, right? So we had flushing nutritionally earlier, and we have flushing embryo transfer meaning now. So we want to be sure that if you talk to people about flushing, that you are understanding which flushing they're talking about as we move forward. So embryo transfer is highly regulated in estrus synchronization, right? Not only we need to know where the donor is, right? The doe that's giving us all of these eggs that we want. We have to make sure that we know where she is in her cycle. We have to sync her. We have to super ovulate her, which means we are giving her plenty of that follicle stimulating hormone so that she releases a very much extra amount of eggs. And then we also need to be sure that we have intense recip management. So recipient ewes or the surrogates, recipient does or the surrogates as we move forward, which means we have to synchronize them as well. And we have to know exactly where they are at in their cycle. So what it really does is just take the embryo that has the sperm and the egg together, and we pick those out, we flush them out of the donor, and we put them into these surrogates. So we get them and we manually put them into the surrogates where they will go and gestate these babies for them. as we move forward. So that's embryo transfer in a nutshell. The actual fertilization can be natural or it can be artificial insemination to get those eggs fertilized. So it's a little bit of your preference of your technician, of whoever is doing this work for you. So in vitro fertilization is also a item that is out there that can be that can happen. So what you would do is we would get the sperm collection or thaw it if it's a frozen one, put it in a petri dish, plus a lot of other things, right? Carriers, mediums, all that good stuff. Then you add the eggs, right? So we put the sperm in there, right? Then we add the eggs, and then you incubate it for a while. We wash it, they add extra cells in there, and then voila, they turn into embryos, right? Fantastic. Some sort of voodoo magic is happening. Then we find the recipients and we implant all of those embryos into the recipients. So we've got lots and lots of extra work that's happening here. But this is an option that is being used out in the goat industry. So I wanted to be sure that we have that covered and so you guys have a general understanding of how that all works. Cloning is also one that is out there that is available to folks in the industry. So it's really interesting that they're going to take some tissue from that donor animal and they're going to put it in a petri dish, right? So we got the donor and they're going to put that all in an egg, right? So they've got an egg from a recipient and they put that DNA tissue into the egg, right? Well, they incubate it and it becomes an embryo. And then they implant that embryo into a recipient where they would gestate it and then give birth. So this is really interesting. And I've done a little bit more research and there is a place that TransOva is actually doing cloning work out there. So if you are interested, they have a whole webpage dedicated to their cloning work. And it's really quite interesting when you think about it and understand how it all happens. So it could be from even a dead tissue. They can pull DNA from a dead tissue. They can pull DNA from a wether. If you wanted, if you weathered it and you are kind of having regrets that, oh man, maybe I really should have used that as a buck. You can do some of this cloning technology. One would assume that the cost is quite high. I did not get into that area, but I did want to be sure that we were talking about it and understanding that that is an option that is out there. It's becoming more popular, so I wanted to be sure that we covered it. I want to talk a little bit on the health, right? So we want to talk about health in general, but I want to talk about herd health, right? I'm not talking about that doe. I'm talking about the whole herd. So the very first thing, I would be remiss if I didn't say, you need to have a relationship with your veterinarian, right? I am not a veterinarian. This is also where I plug in and say, the things I'm about to tell you are really great information that you should use as talking points with your veterinarian. Talk with them, use them as a tool for your herd as you move forward. I am blessed that I get to talk to my veterinarian 2 or 3 times a week. She is my sister as we move forward. So it's really understanding that they're not just there for when your animals are sick. We want to be sure that we're talking with them, having a whole herd health management plan that includes vaccinations, that includes talking to them about ventilation and biosecurity and all of these things that don't specifically deal with one disease. So we want to be sure that you're using your veterinarians and getting a good relationship with them as you move forward. So reproduction is a luxury, and we need to be sure that we're understanding this as we talk about any understanding of reproduction. We need to be sure that we think about it as this animal would not reproduce if we don't have all of these other boxes checked first. So I have the animal nutritional use hierarchy up here. So first is vital functions, right? We have eating, heart, lungs, liver, right? Standing up, walking. Development and growth are a subcategory of that. So if we start breeding these does too young, this is where our animal nutritional use, they're going to pull that nutrition to develop and grow first. That's only if they have extra will they reproduce. So we want to be sure that we're understanding that they get that dietary energy available to them. It goes to vital functions. If there's any excess, it goes to lactation if they're milking. If there's any excess, then it goes to reproduction. If they're not reproducing, if there's any excess, it goes to storage, which would be fat, right? So reproduction is the first trait that would shut down if energy requirements are not met. Priority is the self. So being sure that themselves have enough ability to, eat, breathe, sleep, move, walk, heart, lungs, liver, digestion, all of those things. Priority is self and then offspring. So they care about all of their ability to function, then making milk, being sure that there's enough milk for the one that is currently born. We're not going to be able to get reproduction if we do not have enough excess energy from those two. So a lot of times we maybe look back, or I do when I have sheep, they've milked down, right? So during that heavy lactation time, heavy milking time, they're pulling a lot of that fat, a lot of that storage off of their back to be sure that their current offspring has the ability to survive. There's no way that they would be able to be bred at that point in time because their nutritional use is so concentrated on those first two items, vital function and lactation. So I just want to be sure that we all understand and we all think about that reproduction is a luxury, and it's that first trait that gets shut down if we don't have enough energy. So talking about health and understanding our herd health, we want to be sure, I'm going to hit on a few things that are specific to reproduction and health. So there's something out there called Cache Valley virus. So Cache Valley virus is a virus that is transmitted by mosquitoes during gestation. So those clinical symptoms that you might see would be abortions, dystocias, weak lambs, weak kids, deformed kids, right? So the weird thing is that Cache Valley could actually infect one of the fetuses, but not the other. And we have no symptoms in the adults. So the does are going to go unnoticed until we actually get to that birth time. So once that birth time comes is when you're going to start seeing some of those dystocias, weak lambs, deformed lambs. The curling and twisting of the legs is a really big sign or symptom that you would understand. How would you confirm this diagnosis? Well, there is serum testing available. If you work with your veterinarian, they will be able to give you some more information on that. But a tentative diagnosis would be from an outbreak of abortions, stillborns, or deformed lambs. As of right now, there is no vaccine on the market that claims to have any protection against this. It's becoming more of a concern in Central Ohio. At least we're pretty worried about it. So we want to be sure that we have an understanding of where those pastures are that might have a little bit more tendency to have some mosquitoes, and we're keeping those does off of them while they're in those gestation periods. Vaccines, if we're going to vaccinate our does during gestation or understanding vaccines with reproduction, we want to talk about CD&T. So this is Clostridium perfringens types C and D, and then tetanus toxoid is also in there. So it's not for reproduction specifically, but it is recommended while they're gestating. So I wanted to be sure we threw it in here because it's part of that post-breeding management that we want to be sure we're understanding. So we need to do this about 15 to 30 days prior to kidding, and we want to be sure that we get all of those antibodies in the colostrum so that those lambs can, or so that those kids can get all of those antibodies is much harder to break the lamb kid thing than it is the ewe doe. I'm terribly sorry. So once we have those kids that are available at 3 weeks old, we would then vaccinate them. So there are vaccines out there that can prevent some abortion happenings that would be. So this is one that we really want to be sure you're working with your vet on if you do have an outbreak of abortions, and think about this, and think about maybe how you can prevent it in the future. So there is a chlamydiosis. There is a vaccine out there. It increases your resistance, but it's not very long lasting, or it's not absolute. So we want to be sure that you're kind of thinking about it, or understanding that maybe this is indeed the cause of your abortions before we think about using that as a standard practice. And then also Campylobacter or vibriosis, there is a vaccination out there for it as well. It does require 2 doses prior to breeding, and then once per year. The other recommendation for Campylobacter vibriosis is to kind of think about having a antibiotic in the feed if you are trying to treat a current outbreak. And this is going to require a VFD, so a veterinary feed directive, working with your vet and being sure that you are allowed to purchase and get those antibiotics into your feed.